2 minutes ago, the palace's calm surface cracked because King Charles allegedly stopped Camilla from hiring her ex-husband as a palace advisor. Not delayed, not reviewed, stopped. The kind of hard veto that only happens when reputations are on the line and trust is already thin. Inside the household, it didn't read like a staffing decision. It read like a power struggle, one that quietly asks the most dangerous question of all: who is running the king's court, and who is trying to. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Because Charles didn't block it slowly. He blocked it immediately, fast enough to signal fear of fallout, fast enough to suggest this wasn't the first time the idea had surfaced, and fast enough to make everyone in the building understand something serious had just been prevented. In royal life, speed is confession. When a king moves that quickly, it means he believes the damage isn't hypothetical. It's predictable, it's measurable, and it's close enough to taste. Camilla's push, insiders whisper, was framed as experience, a familiar face. Someone trusted, someone who understands her world and can help her navigate a complicated court. But inside palace corridors, the word people actually heard wasn't experience, it was influence. Because palace advisor isn't a casual job title. It implies access to private strategy and schedules, proximity to sensitive conversations, and the kind of quiet presence that can bend decisions without ever appearing on paper. Advisors don't just advise, they shape, they filter, they decide what reaches the principal and what gets quietly redirected. And that's why Charles's veto felt like a firewall being slammed down before smoke could fill the room. The staff reaction tells you how dangerous this looked from the inside. The scramble wasn't about recruiting, it was about containment. Phones move faster when a rumor can outrun the palace's ability to control it. People start choosing words carefully, suddenly aware that the wrong sentence could become tomorrow's headline. Because the moment the phrase "Camilla's ex-husband is attached to palace advisor," the story writes itself in the public imagination, whether it's fair or not. And the monarchy isn't built to survive stories it can't control. It's built to prevent them from forming in the first place. Within minutes, a quiet split forms, the kind the public never sees but the household feels in its bones: protect the queen consort versus protect the crown. Those aren't always the same mission. Protecting Camilla might mean giving her what she wants, securing her comfort, reinforcing her confidence and her influence. Protecting the crown might mean the opposite, preventing anything that looks like personal network expansion, nepotism by proximity, or an advisory structure that seems to serve one household more than the institution itself. And the frightening part is that both sides will claim they are protecting stability. They'll just define stability differently. That's why the veto becomes a public risk shield rather than a personal disagreement. Charles didn't just say no because he dislikes the optics. He said no because optics can become governance problems. Because perception can become legitimacy problems. Because if the public believes the court is being shaped by private relationships, it stops trusting the institution's neutrality, and neutrality is the crown's most fragile illusion. The palace can survive drama. What it struggles to survive is the sense that its inner workings are being commandeered by personal loyalties. And then comes the foreshadowing that makes this feel even colder. Charles suspects a hidden agenda behind the hiring push. Not necessarily sinister in the cartoon sense, but strategic. Timing matters. The urgency matters. The insistence matters. Why push for this now, when scrutiny is high and the court is already sensitive? Why insist on an advisor role rather than a harmless, distant arrangement? Because advisors aren't for comfort. Advisors are for control. And if the goal was simply support, there are safer ways to achieve it without triggering a legitimacy alarm. So Charles's hard veto becomes a message inside the palace: there will be no parallel power center built around the queen consort's private choices. There will be no new channel of influence that bypasses the king's comfort level. There will be no trusted figure embedded so close that decisions can be shaped without oversight. And the fact that Charles felt he needed to send that message at all suggests something deeper and ongoing tension about who gets to build the court, who gets to place people in key positions, and who ultimately decides how the king's reign is structured behind the scenes. Because when reputations are on the line and trust is thin, even one hire can feel like an invasion. And once you realize this isn't about employment, the next question becomes terrifying. Why did Camilla want that man inside the palace walls at all? A palace advisor doesn't just offer opinions. They touch the machinery, schedules, messaging, proximity, who gets through the door and who gets left outside it. That's why Charles's reaction feels so severe. Because letting Camilla's ex-husband into an advisory role wouldn't just add a staff member, it would create a new channel of influence. And in royal life, channels don't exist by accident. They exist because someone wants to move power quietly, without announcing it. Because advisor roles shape who has access to the king and key decisions in ways the public rarely imagines. They determine what reaches Charles first and what reaches him last. They influence how a crisis is framed before it is ever spoken aloud. They help decide which voices get amplified and which get softened into silence. A palace advisor can become the invisible hinge on which an entire day turns: who gets an audience, who gets redirected, which ideas are presented as urgent, and which are delayed until they die naturally. That's why the word advisor makes people inside royal walls sit up straighter. It isn't a title, it's proximity. And proximity is power. That's also why neutral expertise is often a cover for strategic positioning. The palace will always sell an appointment as competence, experience, professionalism, efficiency. Those words are designed to sound harmless, to keep the public calm and the headlines polite. But insiders understand that competence isn't the only reason someone is chosen. Sometimes the reason is loyalty. Sometimes the reason is access. Sometimes the reason is that the person being embedded will carry a private agenda, subtle, patient, hard to detect, because they're placed there by someone who benefits when the flow of information changes. And the palace fears mixed loyalties more than almost anything. Not because it assumes everyone is malicious, but because mixed loyalties create spillover. Information moves. Conversations get repeated. Emotional alliances bleed into strategic decisions. If Camilla's ex-husband sits close enough to the machinery, the palace starts asking uncomfortable questions. Whose interests will he prioritize when priorities conflict? What does he report back to Camilla's circle that he hears in the king's orbit? What does he influence by being the person in the room when a decision is being shaped? In an institution obsessed with containment, spillover is a nightmare. That's why Camilla's office gaining leverage becomes the real alarm bell. If her preferred person is embedded, her influence isn't just social, it becomes structural. Her team doesn't just learn the schedules, it learns the rhythm of decision-making. It doesn't just prepare for events, it prepares narratives. It doesn't just react to strategy, it helps steer it. And when that happens, the court begins to look like it has two centers of gravity: the king's court and the queen consort's court. Two centers means competition. Competition means factionalism. And factionalism is how palaces collapse slowly while smiling for cameras. Charles's court sees this as a boundary issue whose counsel matters most, because the king's authority is built not only on what he decides, but on who shapes the options before the decision is made. If Charles allows a new channel of influence to form around him without his clear consent, then he is signaling weakness. He is signaling that appointments can be pushed through by pressure rather than approved by principle. And that is why his reaction felt so severe. It wasn't just no, it was "this line exists." A boundary drawn to prevent the court from being quietly redesigned around a person Charles didn't choose. Foreshadow hangs over everything here. This role wasn't designed to outlast a single event. That's what makes it feel calculated. Advisors aren't hired for one day. They're hired to shape an era. If this appointment had gone through, it wouldn't have been a temporary experiment, it would have become precedent. And precedent, in royal life, is how power moves without paperwork. Once a person is inside the machinery, removing them becomes political, and keeping them becomes normalized. That's why stopping it early matters. It prevents normalization. It prevents the palace from waking up 6 months later and realizing the flow of influence has changed permanently. So the conflict isn't really about whether the ex-husband is competent. It's about whether the palace will allow a new route into the king's circle that can't be easily monitored once it exists. It's about whether Camilla's private choices become institutional architecture. And it's about whether Charles can still define the boundaries of his own court, or whether those boundaries are being tested by people who believe they can push them. But when access becomes the prize, the conflict turns personal, because the hiring wasn't just a proposal, it was a test of Charles's authority. Camilla's supporters would call it practicality. Her critics would call it infiltration. But insiders whisper a darker theory: Camilla wasn't trying to hire a resume, she was trying to hire a shield. Someone loyal to her history, her instincts, her version of events. And when the palace is under pressure, loyal voices become weapons. Charles heard the pitch and saw the risk. If Camilla controls the advice around him, she controls the story around him. Because on paper, the argument sounds clean. Competence, trust, familiarity, someone who understands her working style, someone who can anticipate problems, someone who can support her role in a demanding court. That's how Camilla's camp frames it: reasonable, efficient, even modern. But Charles doesn't live in the paper world. He lives in the consequence world. He hears trusted and immediately asks trusted by whom, for what, and at whose expense. Because trust inside the palace is never neutral. It shifts gravity. It changes who gets access to private moments. It alters who shapes the language before it becomes official. It decides whose version of events becomes the one the public is gently guided toward believing. And that's why Charles sees reputational risk and divided loyalty in a single move, not because an ex-husband is automatically unqualified, but because the optics write themselves, and optics can become political reality faster than truth. The presence of Camilla's ex-husband inside the advisory orbit implies something the palace fears deeply: a second court forming around the queen consort. A parallel pipeline of influence. A private network embedded inside public duty. And once you create a second court, you don't just create additional advice, you create competition. You create factions. You create leaks that serve one center of power while weakening the other. Advisors warn it could look like favoritism or manipulation because the story would be almost impossible to sell as normal. The public doesn't hear nuance when the ingredients are volatile. It hears headline. It hears scandal. It hears palace drama. And Charles, whose authority depends on appearing above domestic maneuvering, cannot afford to look like his court is being redesigned around personal loyalty. If that perception takes hold, it doesn't just damage Camilla, it damages him. It makes him look managed instead of managing. Foreshadow grows sharper with another detail whispered behind closed doors: Camilla's team is already building influence networks. Not illegal, not cinematic villain level, just the quiet, normal palace behavior of placing trusted figures in strategic positions and calling it support. But when you combine that with a controversial appointment attempt, it starts to look like a pattern rather than a one-off. And patterns are what terrify monarchies, because patterns suggest intention. Intention suggests power play. Power play invites scrutiny. That's why the conflict becomes about narrative control, not staffing. The appointment isn't the real story. The real story is who gets to shape the king's environment, who filters information, who frames crises, who directs the tone of the reign. If Camilla can place her preferred person into an advisory role, She gains more than help. She gains leverage. And leverage in a palace is the difference between being a partner and being a power center. And once narrative control becomes the real battlefield, the palace does what it always does, reaches for optics to hide the war. Because when royal tension threatens to become public, the palace doesn't argue, it edits. Suddenly, sources appear. Language gets softened. The story becomes misunderstood before the world even knows it exists. Because if people hear Charles blocked Camilla, they hear division. But if people hear protocol review, they hear order. The palace isn't protecting feelings. It's protecting the illusion that power inside the monarchy is seamless, not contested. Advisors attempt to reframe the veto as routine procedure, as if it's just a standard review, the kind of thing any appointment goes through. Soft leaks paint Charles as protecting the institution, not opposing Camilla, making him sound responsible rather than confrontational. Counter leaks paint Camilla as trying to modernize, not overreach, making her sound proactive rather than ambitious. The language is engineered so that no one looks guilty, no one looks defeated, and the monarchy looks like it's calmly managing process. Because the palace knows the public is more comfortable with process than with conflict. Staff are warned to keep details vague and minimize discussion, because details create angles, and angles create narratives, and narratives create sides. The press becomes a battlefield for perception, and perception becomes a weapon. And somewhere in the background, the most unsettling foreshadow hums, someone benefits if this looks like Charles versus Camilla. Because a divided couple is easier to influence, easier to pressure, easier to manipulate through leaks and public opinion. If the story shifts from a risky appointment was blocked to the king and queen consort are at war, then the institution loses stability and someone else gains room to move. But the deeper Charles digs, the more unsettling the pattern becomes, because this hiring push may be connected to something already happening behind the scenes. Royal decisions don't accelerate without pressure. That's what makes this feel urgent. Insiders whisper there was a timeline, an event approaching, a report landing, a vulnerability exposed that made Camilla want her own trusted figure in place immediately. Charles didn't just block a hire, he blocked a timing move. And timing in royal life is never random. Timing is a confession that someone is preparing for impact. Because a private timeline has a way of turning polite requests into demands. Suddenly the language inside the palace shifts. Advisors stop saying sometime soon and start saying before. Before the next engagement, before the next briefing, before the next story breaks. And when the palace starts using coded words like stability, continuity, risk, it's usually because something is being protected that can't be named publicly. That's what made this hiring attempt feel like more than a staffing idea. It felt like a chess move pushed forward by urgency, Camilla wanting a trusted figure embedded now, not later, because later might be too late. Charles, insiders whisper, didn't see the hire as support. He saw it as influence aimed at an upcoming decision. And upcoming decisions inside royal life aren't just about calendars, they're about structure. They're about who gets heard first, who shapes the draft before the king ever reads it, who controls the tone of the message before it becomes official. If Camilla's person is inside the machinery at the precise moment a sensitive decision is being framed, then Camilla's office gains leverage without announcing it. And the palace worries about appearances of favoritism and control, because even the suggestion of it can turn into a legitimacy problem overnight. That's where the foreshadowing sharpens into something colder. Someone may have threatened a leak or a public narrative shift. Not necessarily a direct threat spoken aloud, but the kind of pressure that hangs in the air like weather. The sense that if certain decisions don't go a certain way, a story becomes louder, messier, harder to contain. The veto suggests Charles is reacting to a pressure he can't reveal. Because kings don't like admitting they're being pushed, they prefer to look like they're choosing. But when you see urgency, you're seeing pressure. And when you see pressure, you're seeing vulnerability. And once you accept there's a hidden deadline, the conflict stops being professional, because it becomes about trust inside the marriage itself. This is where it turns from palace politics into something raw. Charles isn't just managing a court, he's managing a marriage inside a court. Blocking Camilla's choice is a public risk decision, but it's also personal. Because when you stop your spouse from placing someone close to them in power, you're saying, "I don't trust the consequences of your judgment." And that sentence, spoken or not, changes the air between them permanently. Because Charles is balancing duty to the crown with loyalty to Camilla, and those loyalties don't always walk in the same direction. Duty demands he protect the institution from anything that looks like parallel influence. Loyalty demands he respect his wife's instincts, her comfort, her desire to feel supported in a palace that has never been entirely kind to her. But when he blocks her choice, Camilla reads it as humiliation or rejection, not just because she didn't get her way, but because the veto implies her judgment is a risk. And being treated like a risk inside your own marriage creates a fracture that doesn't heal with a polite smile. Advisors fear personal tension will spill into institutional instability, because royal marriages aren't private in practice. They become symbols. When the king and queen consort look unified, the monarchy looks stable. When they look strained, the monarchy looks contested. So the palace monitors body language, appearances, and schedule, changes the way a hospital monitors vital signs, searching for the slightest signal that the relationship is shifting into something the public might notice. And the moment the palace starts monitoring like that, it reveals its own anxiety. It knows this could turn into a public story, whether anyone wants it to or not. Foreshadow tightens with the rumor of a compromise offer, because compromises in royal life often spark bigger fights. A compromise means one side didn't fully win, which means resentment stays alive. It means new negotiations, new conditions, new quiet battles over access and control. And that's how the relationship becomes a symbol of stability or fracture. Not because Charles and Camilla are performing for cameras, but because their private dynamic decides how the court functions when the pressure rises. But when private tension touches public authority, retaliation doesn't look like shouting, it looks like quiet moves that isolate you inch by inch. Palaces hate stalemates, so they don't sit in them. If Charles blocks one door, another door opens somewhere else. Insiders whisper Camilla's camp didn't stop pushing, it redirected. New names floated, new roles created, new temporary arrangements that become permanent if no one stops them. Because the goal wasn't a person, the goal was influence. And influence always finds a way into the building when it's invited by someone powerful enough. Because in the palace, a veto is never the end of a story, it's the beginning of a quieter one. If the headline move fails, the sideways move begins. Alternative safe candidates appear as a workaround, the kind of names that sound harmless enough to pass review, while still achieving the real objective proximity. The palace loves safe candidates, because safe candidates don't trigger alarms in the public mind. They don't raise eyebrows. They don't generate uncomfortable questions. But inside the building, safe doesn't always mean neutral. Safe often means useful. And while the public might believe the conflict ended the moment Charles said no, insiders whisper Camilla's circle expands in quieter, less visible ways. Not through one controversial appointment, but through a gradual widening of her orbit. New helpers, private consultants, advisory support, all framed as administrative adjustments. Paperwork can make anything sound temporary, interim, short-term, for this season. But in royal life, temporary arrangements become permanent when nobody has the energy or the authority to reverse them once they settle in. That's why Charles' allies respond by tightening access and briefings to protect him. The gates don't close with a loud slam. They close with delays, with fewer invitations, with shorter meetings, with information arriving later than it used to. The goal is to limit the number of hands that touch sensitive strategy. Because once the palace suspects influence networks are being built, the first instinct is containment. And containment creates its own tension, because the more you restrict access, the more the other side feels cornered, and cornered people don't relax, they maneuver. Rival factions inside the palace reposition for leverage the way weather systems shift before a storm. People who were once background voices suddenly become essential. Others get quietly sidelined. The real power struggle isn't always who speaks loudest, it's who gets access to the decision before the decision becomes official. And that's why this conflict becomes a test of who can outmaneuver whom. Because if Charles can hold the line, he proves his court remains singular and controlled. If Camilla's camp can redirect influence into the building anyway, it proves something far more unsettling, that the Queen Consort's orbit can create parallel pathways even when the king says no. Foreshadow sharpens into something colder, with the hint of a second leak more damaging than the first. The first story is about a blocked hire. The second story, Insider's Fear, could be about why it was blocked, what was said behind the scenes, and what the palace is really hiding about how decisions are made. Leaks don't always exist to expose truth. Sometimes they exist to force outcomes, to pressure compromise, to make one side look unreasonable until it yields. And once that possibility enters the room, every conversation becomes guarded, because now the conflict isn't just political, it's vulnerable. Here's the final twist: the ex-husband hiring attempt may be the first visible crack in a much bigger plan, one that quietly rebuilds the palace power structure around competing centers of influence. Charles blocking Camilla isn't the ending. It's the opening move of a reset where loyalty, access and legacy are being renegotiated in real time. And if the monarchy needs renegotiation, it means something is coming that the palace can't face with the old rules. Because the veto exposes competing visions of how the court should be run. One vision insists the king's court must remain disciplined, centralized, and protected from personal networks that look like private leverage. The other vision pushes for a stronger queen consort orbit, more trusted figures, more independent support, more influence over strategy, whether spoken aloud or not. And as those visions collide, a new inner circle begins forming. Who's in and who's out matters, because in monarchy, the inner circle isn't just friendship, it's governance. It decides what's possible, what's blocked, and what becomes inevitable. The palace braces for scrutiny of how decisions are really made, because once the public senses internal conflict, it starts asking questions the institution hates most: who has power, who is steering, who is being managed. Camilla's influence becomes a headline risk, not a private reality, and Charles risks losing control if leaks escalate into public fracture. A fractured court invites speculation. Speculation invites pressure. Pressure invites compromises that weaken authority. And once authority weakens, the palace begins surviving day by day instead of ruling with confidence. The final threat hangs in the air: more documents or messages could surface to force outcomes. A memo, a private briefing note, a text, a phrase taken out of context and weaponized, anything that turns an internal dispute into a public referendum. And the ending cliffhanger becomes brutal. Will Charles hold the line, or will the palace force a compromise that looks like stability, but feels like surrender? And once you realize this was never about one hire, the final twist becomes unavoidable, because it points to a larger royal reset. Because if this was only the official block, the unofficial aftermath is where the monarchy's real battle lines will be drawn. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.